Hello there everybody, Brandon here coming to you in my studio and a little mini art gallery I've got going on here. So a quick painting video, this time kind of at a request actually from one of the subscribers on my channel. I do run a fly fishing store and a guide service here at the front end of my shop. And so I have some fly fishing related art that I have done in the past. And so these are some of the flies that I have painted. So I thought, well, let's do a little video here about my process for painting some of these flies. And we're going to do in this video one of the most common flies that's been in existence for centuries is this little fella right here. This fly right here known as the Royal Coachman Wetfly. We catch a wide variety of fish on that. So to have a look at my process of painting this Royal Coachman Wetfly, let's do it. Okay, what I have here now is an 8x10 canvas that I'm going to be doing this particular fly on. All I have done is I have put some gray color along the edges of this just to knock off the white along the sides and the spines of my canvas, and I am going to put a background in first. Now, to paint a fly that we're going to be doing, realistically, you could put in any solid color background you want. Again, here's our Royal Coachman Wetfly that we're going to be painting. I'm going to stick him up there for our reference. You could put a solid color in here, anything that you wanted to do that would contrast nicely with that. I'm going to do something a little bit more complex than just a solid color. One of my favorite paintings I've done of a fly that it turned out really well that I liked is of the elk hair caddis that I did, where it looks like it's sitting on maybe a piece of wood or a wooden countertop or something, that the back of it is a little out of focus, and the only thing that's in focus is right where the fly is itself. So I'm going to do the same kind of deal here. I'm going to come into I want to use a lot of kind of grays and light brown and tan in here to contrast with this fly. So I'm just going to use a fair amount of titanium white and a touch of black in there with it, and a tiny bit of raw umber in there with it to start out with, and just create kind of a grayed out tan looking color, and come in back here and just start putting that in. I'm not looking for specifically a uniform color here, so I've got a little bit of variation of darks and lighter tones in there as I'm going back to the palette and mixing it, because it's going to be like maybe a wood grain, if that's what we want to call it, that's going to be out of focus back there. So we don't want it to be just all one value. And I'm kind of keeping my brush strokes at a somewhat consistent angle just to give the illusion back there that this is something with maybe a grain to it, or a specific directional characteristic anyway. Now in here where our fly is going to be is where our edges will be the crispest, sharpest lines and our darkest values. Now to put our fly in here, I think I'm going to use a pencil to start with to kind of sketch out a little basic deal of what I'm going for. So I'm looking at proportions here in terms of the hook shank length to the materials that are on it, to the tail hanging out and everything. So I've got a hook shank length here about 2/3 the total length of this fly. So if I come in here on my canvas and say that this fly is going to extend, you know, about this far across my canvas, and we're going to put the eye of our hook, let's say maybe right in here. My hook shank is going to be about 2/3 of that distance, so the bend of my hook is going to be right in this vicinity. So we'll say our hook extends through here. Let's put our bend in the hook right in about there. And then the tails will extend out right in there. These feathers, these wings across the top, you know, they just kind of lay in up to somewhere in about that vicinity, I think. So I'm fairly happy with that. Just giving me a basic guide of where I want to go. Now I got this is like a size 4 kind of a Filbert brush. It's kind of a flat, pointed looking thing that I'm gonna come in here and basically paint in my basic hook shape and everything. And I want a real dark value to start with. I don't want it completely black though, so we're gonna mostly raw umber, and we're just gonna add a little bit of black to that. And we're going to come in here and paint where the eye of our hook is going to be. A straight edge here. I'm going to go ahead and put my curve in of my hook. And you don't have to worry about this being a perfect round bend, because I'm going to give you a little secret if you're not much of a fisherman or fly fisherman or whatever. Hooks come in all sorts of shapes. There are perfect little round bend and U-bend shape hooks, but that doesn't mean that the fly you're painting has to be a perfectly round bend on your hook. So just put you a bend in there of some kind that you like. And we'll figure out the rest of those details once we have a basic shape in place. And now we're going to be painting over all of this section here with the materials of our fly, so I'm not worried about finishing any of that out. All I'm going to do now is get the bended area of the hook that will be visible, shaped like I want it to, and the kind of thickness that I want it to be. And this is just, you know, you getting it to a point you're happy with it. I mean, hooks that flies are tied on also have different thicknesses of the hook based off of what they're designed to do, so there's no real magic size or spacing on this either. Alright, I think we have a base of a hook in place. Now we'll come back and put a metallic kind of highlight on there to make it look like a metal hook once I've done the rest of the fly. So this Royal Coachman here, when I'm tying a fly in real life, I start from the back and work my way forward, so maybe I'll just do the same thing in painting it. And I might just use this same brush. I can get a pretty skinny line with the tip of it. I'm going to go into straight up raw umber, turn this thing just to make life easier. I'm going to come in here and put some fairly straight lines in. These are natural feather or hair fibers depending on what you've tied it with, so it's not like they have to be, you know, they can have a little undulation and wave to them, but you don't want these lines to be overly curvy one way or the other. You want them to be fairly stiff looking on these tail fibers here. So we're going to just put in, and then this is pretty much just raw umber I'm using right now. Alright, that works for me. Now down here along the base of this section where it's coming off of the hook, I'm going to add a little more black to that mix and darken things up a little bit in here. Make a few brush strokes in here with some darker color, about like that. And we have pretty dark tips on these particular feathers as well, so I may add just a hint of black out here on the ends of these things. And I'm going to switch over to a liner brush and come in here with a creamy light yellow kind of value, so I'm going to use some yellow ochre, a little bit of white. It's not bad, so I'm just going to bring this lighter kind of creamy color right over the top, and I'm leaving the tips of this dark now, but I'm going to come right over the top of that raw umber that we put in. Now this little area in here, we've got a little bit of so when you're tying this fly in real life, what you're using here for some of this body here is as a little feather off of a peacock feather, a peacock herl we call it. So it's got a lot of iridescent kind of greens, a little bit of reds that show out in there, maybe some yellows. I'm going to go into a little bit of just some grass green color with my liner brush and add a little bit of hints of that into this dark area right here at the base of these tail fibers. Now we need to create the rest of the body of our fly, so I'm going to go back to this small brush that I had been dealing with. We're going to go into raw umber again, get our brown back out here, and we're going to mix that green in with it, so we're going to get a really dark kind of green looking color here. Let's just go ahead and section this thing out. So we're going to have peacock herl up to about this point. Then we're going to have red. Then we're going to have a little bit more peacock herl showing right in here. So now we just need to build up this dark area right in here a little bit. And I just want some broken edges that I'll come back with my liner brush to finish putting in the final touches with that. But right now I just want to lay this dark green color in kind of a blob right in here. Now wash that out. Let's go into some red. Add a little bit of raw umber to our red to darken it up a little bit. So we want a nice deep dark brick red kind of color. Let's see what that gets us. We're gonna put a section of that right through the middle here that's not quite as wide top to bottom as our darker green blobs were, which is representing our peacock herl on this fly. Now we have a couple of wings that play out over here. I'm gonna go into some white and some black to create a gray color that we can come back in and do some lighter white highlighting on top of. So I've just made a nice kind of a gray value here, and the tip of our wings, let's say they're just going to come in, I don't know, somewhere right in there. So we need to create the top end that will just drop in, nice little curve. It's going to come in right basically at our hook eye, close to it anyway. That gets us our base for our wing in there. Now the last thing we got going on is a lot of a soft hackle feather that comes off here. And I'm gonna go back into raw umber again, just straight up raw umber with this same little number 4 filbert I've been using. Come right here at the base of this hook and put some brown in there to kind of fill in that gap right in here. And I'll fill the rest in with a liner brush. So now I'm going to move to that liner brush and go right back into our raw umber and draw a bunch of random pieces of feather that will be extending. I might turn this again. A few that might be visible on the back side over there. Now I'm going to move into a little bit of yellow ochre with my raw umber and a touch of titanium white, maybe just a tiny hint of red. Create ourselves a little bit of a highlight color for these that we've been working with right here, and put a few brighter highlight lines in on top of this. Now I'm going to go ahead right here at the front end while I get this liner brush and go into just some straight black. Because if we tied this with black thread, there'll be a little bit of a thread tie off here at the front end that we'll be able to see. I'm just going to put a little glob of black right here at the front end. And add some white to it to gray that out a little bit. Put in a couple of highlight lines in here. Now let's go back and finish off our peacock herl and all this stuff on the body. So we're going to go back into green with a fair amount of raw umber to it, touch of black in it to darken things back up again, and we're going to draw a bunch of little tiny little spiky ends, I guess is the best way to put it, off of this darker blob that we already made. Same thing on this section here at the front. Alright, now we need to highlight this thing out. Like I said, this peacock herl feather has got a lot of iridescent qualities to it, so we're going to come in here and put in a little brighter green. You can put a tiny bit of white in with it to kind of create a little light green value. And this is where you don't want to get carried away with how much of this you put on there. You just want to put and make it go in a couple different directions, because you're going to have feathers wound around this hook that are poking out in every direction. So you want to make little short brush strokes here using the tip of a liner brush or something that are pointing in lots of little different directions. And again, the key here is to not get overboard or carried away with the amount of these things you stick in there. You got to leave plenty of dark, and we'll come back with maybe 1 or 2 passes of slightly different value of that highlight. So just vary up your greens a little bit, one way or another. Maybe add a touch of yellow in there. If you have any neon colors laying around, some neon green, some neon yellow, you can put a little bit of that in here as well. And if you've got some of that, you know, make a few touches of just that color itself in some places, but also put that on some of the other green that you've put in there, where you're literally highlighting one green with another green, or a different value of that green, and it'll look very realistic when you get to your finished product of a very iridescent peacock looking feather. And these marks with this liner brush can be very, very random, because like I said, you've got little feather things poking and laying everywhere, so don't feel like there has to be much of a rhyme or reason to exactly where you're putting them. Now I'm going to go back into more red and a little bit of yellow ochre to give us a nice muted kind of orange looking color. Add a little bit of white to it to lighten it down a little bit so it's not quite so saturated. And we're going to bring that in here. And I'm just really lightly with the end of this liner brush kind of touching that color in here. I don't even know how visible it's going to be on the camera, but it adds a nice little effect in here in these peacock herl wraps that are on this fly. Now let's work on our thread wrap body here in the middle, and I'm going to go straight into some medium red just to see what that does for us with my liner brush. Some lines in here that would be threads that are wrapping around this hook body, and again, don't cover up all your dark red back there. Leave some gaps and some spaces in there. Now I'm going to add, let's add a little bit of yellow ochre to that to orange that out slightly. And put a little bit of that color towards the center, the middle point of this area of the hook that would be the closest to you, that would receive the most highlight of any light that would be catching it. And then, last but not least, on our highlight, tiny bit of titanium white in there. Put the brightest little couple of passes there with that, right towards the middle. Now all that's really left is our big wing across the top and finishing out the details on the hook. So I am going to white with a tiny bit of black in it to create a gray, but I want my gray to be lighter, more on the white side than what I've already got up here. And I'm going to lay this brush in here and try to drag that color in a kind of an arch sweeping motion down to where this wing is tied into the hook. I'm going to do a couple of those where it's possible that I will leave a couple of kind of lines or veins in this feather that are visible, so I'm not necessarily trying to completely cover it. If that makes sense. I'm leaving a few little gaps here and there. Down here where it's approaching the tie-in point on the hook, I'm going to darken that gray up just a little bit. And then out here on the outer edge, we might add a little bit more white into the mix. Just to brighten things up right here on the top edges. Now we just need to finish off our hook here and we're pretty much done. So I'm just going to add a little bit of, first coming back to this gray mix that we just did this wing with. And highlight where some reflection is on this metallic hook. Back here it's pretty much right down the middle. Now after doing that, I'm going to go into pure titanium white on the end of this brush that I just used, so it may not end up being pure titanium white when it hits the canvas because it's on this brush I've been using, but I'm going to come right in the middle of that gray that I just put in. Probably need the liner brush to do it down there. Same thing right in here in the middle of this, just a tiny little touch of white. Now with the liner brush, get our white back on there and get it right out here to the tip of this hook. Alright, now to add that last little bit of detail, if that's what you want to call it, to kind of get this thing looking the way I want it to look, I'm going to add a little bit of some shadow underneath here that's going to be visible on this surface that this thing is laying on. So I'm going to go into a tiny bit of phthalo blue. A little bit of phthalo blue and gray it out with some black and some white. And this might be a little bit of a trial and error deal to get the color exactly the way we want. Trying to create a shadow color here. That's better. We'll start right here underneath this red section and put a little shadow underneath it where it's laying on this, whatever this wood surface we're going to say we're using. Come up here underneath the eye of the hook. Keep it real close here at the front end because that's sitting on that surface right here, so you don't want a long shadow from that. It's going to be a real thin shadow, and then as you back up a little bit here, you can make that shadow a little bit deeper. And then underneath this stuff, just kind of paint it in there as best you can. I might have to go to the liner brush to do that. Let's get it back here underneath the hook, and then maybe show a little bit of it on this side of the hook right in here. Now to get these guys back here and the rest of this stuff, I'm going to move to a liner brush. Get into our shadow color and draw it in as best I can into some of these little gaps in here. And obviously you'd have some shadows underneath these little thin feathers coming down. So paint it into at least a handful of these little gaps and spaces that are in there. And last but not least, add a few things back here underneath some of these guys. Fairly close to them, maybe down there at the tips, and then drag them away from them a little bit. And I think that will do it. I don't know about the shadow of that wing. I guess it would be maybe a real thin one along the edge of that too. I'll move back to my other brush here and maybe draw in a little edge. There we have our finished Royal Coachman fly, and you zoom in there, you can see that that little shadow effect we added along the base just kind of adds to the three-dimensional realism of that. So that's how I paint my flies acrylics on canvas. Hope you enjoyed painting along with that one. Until next time, happy painting, everybody.